Hi, 131. In this tutorial, we'll be talking about how you can use a new method to build your physical models. And in this case, we'll be using templates in order to build your final models. And so, as you recall in the previous tutorial, me and Anita were building our unrolled surfaces by taking the dimensions within Rhino and then projecting them into this front elevation to make these unrolled surfaces. And then we're aligning them, in this case, with a extracted void. We're aligning them with where our figure intersects with the existing column and then cutting out from there, right? And so if you recall, our figure was this square that was extruded in the y direction all the way through our imaginary 8 by 8 cube. And so in doing this kind of distance measurement or dimension in Rhino, and then building it to here, and then also finding these points in the intersection of the figure in an existing kind of lining up with the ruler and trying to make a precise cut with just a ruler. It's important to know that that was kind of a rough way you can build your model, and it's a good way to build quick iterations of showing your idea. But as you move on to build your final model, we wanted to stress how you can make a more precise craft and build your design in a more clearer way, essentially, right? And so as we begin this tutorial, we'll be using some of the same techniques that were used in the previous tutorial to build your unrolled surface, but we're going to apply it into a more simplified way that streamlines this entire thing altogether, right? And so recalling that our figure is this square that goes through the entire 8 by 8 imaginary cube, we're going to begin by building the remaining 3 faces of our void that we left off in the previous tutorial, right? So we know that this square that we're taking through this entire cube intersects this column in some way, right? And so in order to make sure where we need to build exact faces of this remaining 3 faces, we need to know where the column, the extents of the column basically, right? So if we take a construction line that goes from the plan and then to, let's say, the front, in this case, right? Front elevation, we know that the edge of this column ends at this portion of the square, right? And then we can go ahead and build an unrolled surface, basically, right? So the way I'd want to build this unrolled surface is that I know that this void goes through the entire depth of this column, right? And so what I want to do is make a line that is essentially basically the same depth of the column, right? And then I'd take this line that I just made and then align it to this very corner of the cube that or square that we're intersecting with this column in particular. And then I'd line it in the same angle that this square or figure is rotated to, right? So once I do that, I want to make sure that this is in line with the profile of this cube, right? And I make sure that it's in the right layer. And then because I know that this top face is the same depth all the way through on both edges, I can just simply copy this to the other edge where it goes to the edge of this column, right? If that makes sense. And then I go ahead and want to cap this too. And so I do the same for the bottom portion too, right? The same principle applies. So I know that the depth of this face is the same depth on here and here because it goes through the entire column. I can just simply copy this edge and to where it intersects at the edge of this column. And then I'd want to cap it accordingly. And in building this side piece, you want to do essentially the same too, right? So if you imagine this, right, as the front of this unrolled surface, this side will be on here, right? And so if it has the same depth on all these edges, right, I can just copy this by holding down Alt and then rotating this 90 degrees and then moving this towards the corner of the square again, right? And then I can, because I know that it's the same depth all the way through, I'm going to simply copy to the other corner too, and then cap this, right? And so now I have the built unrolled surfaces, right? From the plan that we had and also like the front that we're using to extrude all the way through, right? And so this is a very simplified way and more precise way of making sure that all your surfaces are precise and where they are supposed to be, right? And so in order for me to build this, I want to employ the same techniques that Erica mentioned in her model making tutorial of how she printed a template and then she glued it onto a chipboard, let's say, and then she cut out her figures or shapes and faces from there too, right? And so we'll be doing that in this tutorial as well. So what I want to do is I'd start with building the boundary box of my print, basically. And so my printer prints at a letter size sheet. And so I'd want to make an 11, -8.5 box. And this is essentially the extent of where I want to print, right? And so the way I want to arrange these sides is just simply by copying these faces onto the sheet that I'm trying to print. And so in the same way, I just select all these lines and then hold down Alt and then drag this into my printing parameters, basically. And so, and then I want to first cap all these off, right? And once I do that, I want to make sure that I kind of remember what all these are, right? And so we talked about how this slender piece is the top and this larger piece is this side piece right here. And this bottom portion is this bottom portion right here, right? And to make sure that everything is, you know, kind of crystal clear, I want to make sure with the text command. And so I just label these accordingly to what they're supposed to be named or what they're supposed to be in the model. So again, this top one, this slender portion is this top one, and this bottom one is the bottom one. And what's a little bit tricky about this side face is that this length and this length looks almost exactly the same, right? But if you look closely, right, or what has ended up is that the length of this is actually a tiny bit longer than this length, right? And so as we talked about before, if you unrolled this, all these unrolled surfaces, this length and this length are the same, right? Because if you pull them back in the Z direction, they're going to be the unrolled surfaces that align to each other, right? So it's important to keep that in mind. So as we arrange this one, we want to rotate this in this direction so that it aligns with the width of all these pieces together, right? And then I'd go ahead and label this accordingly, right? This will be the side. And then I want to move this one to here, where all of these are now in the same width and the same cut that I would do if I were to cut this, right? And so as I go ahead and keep setting up this document, I'd want to make sure that this is just a straight because it's just best practice. And then I'd go ahead and also make construction lines that would help my ruler align to a longer piece of straight line, basically, right? Because if I align my ruler on this relatively short line, it's kind of easy to just, sometimes your ruler won't be perfectly straight, right? So if you have a longer line, you'll be able to more easily line up your ruler and make sure that your ruler is all lined up straight to it, right? And so these construction lines are essentially helping me do my cut and also help me align my entire ruler to everything else. And so I make these horizontal construction lines and these vertical construction lines. And so now that I set up this document, I can know that I'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cuts, right? And so that's gonna make my cutting time go faster and make me not worry about if this is gonna be the same length as this or anything else, right? Anything that might go wrong. And so once I've completed this document, I go ahead and use a print command. And then I want to make sure that the scale is 1:1, right? And then I'd go ahead and print this, right? Making sure that everything is configured, other to size and 1:1. Go ahead and print it. And then I'll label this template. So once I have this template set up, I want to build my model using the same techniques that Erica was showing in her tutorial of how she printed this paper as a template, as her template, and then glued it onto her chipboard. And then she used that template to just cut out the pieces of her object, right? And so in the same way, once I print this out and then cut it out, I'll be left with the 3 faces that I wanted to build out, right? So this is the top one, the side one, and then bottom one, right? And so once you have this built out, you can be sure that you have a very precise and clean model, right? And so I hope this helps you in your model making process. And if you have any questions, you can always contact the ISAs in the office hours. And yeah, thank you.